Welcome to Heavy Storytelling. We are going to be reading a story, but first we are going to be reading the Bible, and then we're going to be doing the synopsis, and then we're going to be reading Little Women. So I hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell and miss the video. We got the Bible guy. Likes hugs. He's a huggy. Okay, let's go.
Hi. How is everyone doing today? I don't know why it's doing that. All right, so we're on Matthew chapter 22, and this is the English Standard Version, and it has really whited me out, so I don't know why it's doing that. All right, so this is Matthew 22. And again Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast.' But they paid no attention, and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads, and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find.' And those servants went out into the roads, and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment, and he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot, and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen.' Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words, and they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?' But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, 'Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax.' And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to him, 'Whose likeness and inscription is this?' They said, 'Caesar's.' And he said to them, 'Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. The same day Sadducees came to him, who say there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, 'Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring left his wife to his brother. So too the second and the third, down to the 7th. After them all the women died. In the resurrection therefore of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her.' But Jesus answered them, 'You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living.' And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?' And he said, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets.' Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?' They said to him, 'The son of David.' He said to them, 'How is it then that David in the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, The Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet?' If then David calls him Lord, how is he his son? And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. That is the end of Matthew chapter 22. Hi, Rebecca! So good to see you here today. I hope that you're able to pay attention. We are on now the second half of Little Women. We got Meg married, and Amy went off to Europe, and Joe went to New York, and so Joe was really pretty miserable in New York. She was writing for a newspaper, and it was a really, really wonderful newspaper, actually. It was the New York Times, and she was writing stories for them about they were love poems that she was writing, and it was really sweet, and everybody loved them, and she put her name on them, and it was great. And here's Kimmy to say what really happened.
So, what actually happened was, well, I think we got a chapter about Amy. Maybe? No, that was a few nights ago. So what happened was she met a friend.
Joe.
Yes, Joe. Joe met a friend whose last name was Bear, and he was a German, and he taught lessons. He taught German lessons. So yeah, he was a German professor. Mom's right. And then what happened was Joe, she went over to, I think it was called the Volcano, and that was a newspaper place, and she went to sell some utter garbage, honestly. Probably.
Garbage stories.
Yeah, garbage stories about...
She didn't realize they were garbage until later.
Well, she probably still felt like they were pretty garbage. And realizing it, she did not sign them. Realizing it, she talked with Mr. Bear, and he pointed out a story similar to one of hers, but not one of hers because it was the wrong. Oh, Becca says hi to JJ and Daniel. Hi, Becca. And he showed that he was not supportive of it and literally threw it in the fire. So she went upstairs, read all of her things, and she reread them and threw them all into the fire because they were all really bad stories. And she didn't write any more in New York. And then I think she's on her way back. She just left the train, and Mr. Bear was there to wave her by. Here's Dad to read us a story.
Hello again. We're on chapter 12, Heartache. This is chapter 12 of Little Women Part 2. And let's go ahead and get started. See if this works. Yay, this is better than yesterday. Whatever his motive might have been, Laurie dug to some purpose that year, for he graduated with honor and gave the Latin oration with the grace of a Phillips and the eloquence of Demosthenes. So his friends said they were all there. His grandfather, oh, so proud, Mr. and Mrs. March, John and Meg, Joe and Beth, and all exulted over him with the sincere admiration which boys make light of at the time, but failed to win from the world by any after triumphs. I've got to stay for this confounded supper, but I shall be home early tomorrow. You come and meet me as usual, girls, Laurie said as he put the sisters into the carriage after the joys of the day were over. He said girls, but he meant Jo, for she was the only one who kept up the old customs. She had not the heart to refuse her splendid, successful boy anything, and answered warmly, I'll come, Teddy, rain or shine, and march before you, playing Hail the Conquering Hero Comes on a Jew's harp. Laurie thanked her with a look that made her think in a sudden panic, oh, dearie me, I know he'll say something, and then what shall I do? Evening meditation and morning work somewhat allayed her fears, and having decided that she wouldn't be vain enough to think people were going to propose when she had given them every reason to know what her answer would be, she set forth at the appointed time, hoping Teddy wouldn't go and make her hurt his poor little feelings. A call at Meg's and a refreshing sniff and sip at the Daisy and Demijohn still further fortified her to the tete-a-tete, but when she saw a stalwart figure looming in the distance, she had a strong desire to turn about and run away. Where's the Jew's harp, Jo? Cried Laurie as soon as he was within speaking distance. I forgot it, and Jo took heart again, for that salutation could not be called lover-like. She always used to take his arm on these occasions. Now she did not, and he made no complaint, which was a bad sign, but talked on rapidly about all sorts of far-away subjects till they turned from the road and to the little path that led homeward through the grove. Then he walked more slowly, suddenly lost his fine flow of language, and now and then a dreadful pause occurred to rescue the conversation from one of the wells of silence into which it kept falling. Jo said hastily, Now you must have a good long holiday. I intend to. Something in his resolute tone made Jo look up quickly to find him looking down at her with an expression that assured her the dreaded moment had come, and made her put out her hand with an imploring, No, Teddy, please don't. I will, and you must hear me. It's no use, Jo. We've got to have it out, and the sooner the better for both of us, he answered, getting flushed and excited all at once. Say what you like, then I'll listen, said Jo, with a desperate sort of patience. Laurie was a young lover, but he was in earnest, and meant to have it out if he died in the attempt, so he plunged into the subject with characteristic impetuosity, saying in a voice that would get choky now and then, in spite of manful efforts to keep it steady. I've loved you ever since I've known you, Jo. Couldn't help it, but you've been so good to me. I've tried to show it, but you wouldn't let me. Now I'm going to make you hear and give me an answer, for I can't go on so any longer. I wanted to save you this. I thought you'd understand, began Jo, finding it a great deal harder than she expected. I know you did, but girls are so queer, you never know what they mean. They say no when they mean yes, and drive a man out of his wits just for the fun of it, returned Laurie, entrenching himself behind an undeniable fact. I don't. I never wanted to make you care for me so, and I went away to keep you from it if I could. I thought so. It was like you. But it was no use. I only loved you all the more, and I worked hard to please you, and I gave up billiards and everything you didn't like, and waited and never complained, for I hoped you'd love me, though I'm not half good enough. Here there was a choke that couldn't be controlled, so he decapitated Buttercups while he cleared his confounded throat. Yes, you are. You're a great deal too good for me, and I'm so grateful to you, and so proud and fond of you. I don't see why I can't love you as you want me to. I've tried, but I can't change the feeling, and it would be a lie to say I do when I don't. Really, truly, Jo. He stopped short and caught both her hands as he put his question with a look that she did not soon forget. Really, truly, dear. They were in the grove now, close by the stile, and when the last words fell reluctantly from Jo's lips, Laurie dropped her hands and turned as if to go on, but for once in his life the fence was too much for him, so he just laid his head down on the mossy post and stood so still that Jo was frightened. "Oh, Teddy, I'm so sorry, so desperately sorry. I could kill myself if it would do any good. I wish you wouldn't take it so hard. I can't help it. You know it's impossible for people to make themselves love other people if they don't," cried Joe inelegantly but remorsefully, as she softly patted his shoulder, remembering the time when he had comforted her so long ago. "They do sometimes," said a muffled voice from the post. "I don't believe it's the right sort of love, and I'd rather not try it," was the decided answer. There was a long pause, while a blackbird sung blithely on the willow by the river, and the tall grass rustled in the wind. Presently Joe said, very soberly, as she sat down on the step of the stile, "Laurie, I want to tell you something." He started as if he had been shot, threw up his head, and cried out in a fierce tone, "Don't tell me that, Joe. I can't bear it now." "Tell what?" she asked, wondering at his violence. "That you love that old man." "What old man?" demanded Joe, thinking he must mean his grandfather. "That devilish professor you were always writing about. If you say you love him, I know I shall do something desperate." And he looked as if he would keep his word, as he clenched his hands with the wrathful spark in his eyes. Joe wanted to laugh, but restrained herself and said warmly, for she too was getting excited with all this, "Don't swear, Teddy. He isn't old, nor anything bad, but good and kind, and the best friend I've got next to you. Pray, don't fly into a passion. I want to be kind, but I know I shall get angry if you abuse my professor. I haven't the least idea of loving him, or anybody else. But you will after a while, and then what will become of me? You'll love someone else too, like a sensible boy, and forget all this trouble. I can't love anyone else, and I'll never forget you, Joe." Never, never, with a stamp to emphasize his passionate words. "What shall I do with him?" sighed Joe, finding that emotions were more manageable than she expected. "You haven't heard what I wanted to tell you. Sit down and listen, for indeed I want to do right and make you happy," she said, hoping to soothe him with a little reason, which proved that she knew nothing about love. Seeing a ray of hope in the last speech, Laurie threw himself down on the grass at her feet, leaned his arm on the lower step of the stile, and looked up at her with an expectant face. Now that arrangement was not conducive to calm speech or clear thought on Joe's part, for how could she say hard things to her boy while he watched her with eyes full of love and longing, and lashes still wet with the bitter drop or two of her hardness of heart had wrung from him? She gently turned his head away, saying, as she stroked the wavy hair which had been allowed to grow for her sake, "How touching that was, to be sure. I agree with Mother that you and I are not suited to each other, because our quick tempers and strong wills would probably make us very miserable if we were so foolish as to—" Joe paused a little over the last word, but Laurie uttered it with a rapturous expression. "Marry. No, we shouldn't. If you loved me, Joe, I should be a perfect saint, for you can make me anything you like." "No, I can't. I've tried it and failed, and I won't risk our happiness by such a serious experiment. We don't agree, and we never shall, and we'll be good friends all our lives, but we won't go and do anything rash." "Yes, we will if we get the chance," muttered Laurie rebelliously. "No, do be reasonable, and take a sensible view of the cause," implored Joe, almost at her wit's end. "I won't be reasonable. I don't want to take what you call a sensible view. It won't help me, and it only makes you harder. I don't believe you've got any heart." "I wish I hadn't." There was a little quiver in Joe's voice, and thinking it a good omen, Laurie turned round, bringing all his persuasive powers to bear, as he said, in the wheedlesome tone that had never been so dangerously wheedlesome before, "Don't disappoint us, dear. Everyone expects it. Grandpa has set his heart upon it. Your people like it, and I can't get on without you. Say you will, and let's be happy. Do! Do!" Not until months afterward did Joe understand how she had the strength of mind to hold fast to the resolution she had made when she decided that she did not love her boy, and never could. It was very hard to do, but she did it, knowing that delay was both useless and cruel. "I can't say yes, truly, so I won't say it at all. You'll see that I'm right by and by, and thank me for it," she began solemnly. "I'll be hanged if I do." And Laurie bounced up off the grass, burning with indignation at the bare idea. Yes, you will, persisted Joe. You'll get over this after a while and find some lovely, accomplished girl who will adore you and make a fine mistress for your fine house. I shouldn't. I'm homely and awkward and odd and old, and you'd be ashamed of me, and we should quarrel. We can't help it, even now, you see, and I shouldn't like elegant society, and you would, and you'd hate my scribbling, and I couldn't get on without it, and we should be unhappy, and wish we hadn't done it, and everything would be horrid. Anything more? Asked Laurie, finding it hard to listen patiently to this prophetic burst. Nothing more, except that I don't believe I shall ever marry. I'm happy as I am, and love my liberty too well to be in a hurry, and to give it up for any mortal man. I know better, broke in Laurie. You think so now, but there'll come a time when you will care for somebody, and you'll love him tremendously and live and die for him. I know you will. It's your way, and I shall have to stand by and see it. And the despairing lover cast his hat upon the ground with a gesture that would have seemed comical if his face had not been so tragical. Yes, I will live and die for him if he ever comes and makes me love him in spite of myself, and you must do the best you can, cried Joe, losing patience with poor Teddy. I've done my best, but you won't be reasonable, and it's selfish of you to keep teasing for what I can't give. I shall always be fond of you, very fond indeed as a friend, but I'll never marry you, and the sooner you believe it, the better for both of us. So now... That speech was like fire to gunpowder. Laurie looked at her a minute as if he did not quite know what to do with himself, then turned sharply away, saying in a desperate sort of tone, You'll be sorry some day, Joe. Oh, where are you going? She cried, for his face frightened her. To the devil, was the consoling answer. For a minute Joe's heart stood still as he swung himself down the bank toward the river, but it takes much folly, sin, or misery to send a young man to a violent death, and Laurie was not one of the weak sort who are conquered by a single failure. He had no thought of a melodramatic plunge, but some blind instinct led him to fling hat and coat into his boat and row away with all his might, making better time up the river than he had done in many a race. Joe drew a long breath and unclasped her hands as she watched the poor fellow trying to outstrip the trouble which he carried in his heart. That will do him good, and he'll come home in such a tender, penitent state of mind that I shan't dare to see him, she said, adding, as she went slowly home, feeling as if she had murdered some innocent thing and buried it under the leaves. Now I must go and prepare Mr. Lawrence to be very kind to my poor baby. I wish he'd love Beth. Perhaps he may, in time, but I begin to think I was mistaken about her. Oh, dear. How can girls like to have lovers and refuse them? I think it's dreadful. Being sure that no one could do it so well as herself, she went straight to Mr. Lawrence, told the hard story bravely, though, and then broke down, crying so dismally over her own insensibility that the kind old gentleman, though sorely disappointed, did not utter a reproach. He found it difficult to understand how any girl could help loving Laurie, and hoped she would change her mind, but he knew even better than Joe that love cannot be forced, so he shook his head sadly and resolved to carry his boy out of harm's way, for young impetuosity's parting words to Joe disturbed him more than he would confess. When Laurie came home, dead tired but quite composed, his grandfather met him as if he knew nothing, and kept up the delusion very successfully for an hour or two. But when they sat together in the twilight, the time they used to enjoy so much, it was hard work for the old man to ramble on as usual, and harder still for the young one to listen to praises of the last year's successes, which to him now seemed love's labor lost. He bore it as long as he could, then went to his piano and began to play. The windows were open, and Joe, walking in the garden with Beth, for once understood music better than her sister, for he played the Sonata Pathétique, and played it as he never did before. That's very fine, I dare say, but it's sad enough to make one cry. Give us something gayer, lad. said Mr. Lawrence, whose kind old heart was full of sympathy which he longed to show but knew not how. Laurie dashed into a livelier strain, played stormily for several minutes, and would have got through bravely if, in a momentary lull, Mrs. March's voice had not been heard calling, "Joe, dear, come in, I want you." Just then, just what Laurie longed to say, with a different meaning. As he listened, he lost his place. The music ended with a broken chord, and the musician sat silent in the dark. "I can't stand this," muttered the old gentleman. Up he got, groped his way to the piano, laid a kind hand on either of the broad shoulders, and said as gently as a woman, "I know, my boy, I know." No answer for an instant. Then Laurie asked sharply, "Who told you?" "Jo herself." "Then there's an end of it." And he shook off his grandfather's hands with an impatient motion, for though grateful for the sympathy, his man's pride could not bear a man's pity. "Not quite. I want to say one thing, and then there shall be an end of it," returned Mr. Lawrence with unusual mildness. "You won't care to stay at home just now, perhaps?" "I don't intend to run away from a girl. Jo can't prevent me seeing her, and I shall stay and do it as long as I like," interrupted Laurie in a defiant tone. "Not if you are the gentleman. I think you... Not if you are the gentleman I think you. I'm disappointed, but the girl can't help it, and the only thing left for you to do is to go away for a time." "Where will you go?" "Anywhere. I don't care what becomes of me," and Laurie got up with a reckless laugh that grated on his grandfather's ear. "Take it like a man, and don't do anything rash, for goodness sake. Why not go abroad as you planned and forget it?" "I can't." "But you've been wild to go, and I promised you should when you got through college." "Ah, but I didn't mean to go alone," and Laurie walked fast through the room with an expression which it was well his grandfather did not see. "I don't ask you to go alone. There's someone ready and glad to go with you. Anywhere in the world." "Who, sir?" "Myself." Laurie came back as quickly as he went, and put out his hand, saying huskily, "I'm a selfish brute, but, you know, grandfather—" "Lord help me, yes, I do know, for I've been through it all before, once in my own young days, and then with your father. Now, my dear boy, just sit quietly down and hear my plan. It's all settled, and can be carried out at once," said Mr. Lawrence, keeping hold of the young man, as if fearful that he would break away as his father had done before him. "Well, sir, what is it?" And Laurie sat down without a sign of interest in face or voice. "There is business in London that needs looking after. I meant you should attend to it, but I can do it better myself, and things here will get on very well with Brooke to manage them. My partners do almost everything. I'm merely holding on till you take my place, and can be off at any time." "But you hate traveling, sir. I can't ask it of you at your age," began Laurie, who was grateful for the sacrifice, but much preferred to go alone if he went at all. The old gentleman knew that perfectly well, and particularly desired to prevent it, for the mood in which he found his grandson assured him that it would not be wise to leave him to his own devices. So, stifling a natural regret at the thought of the home comforts he would leave behind him, he said stoutly, "Bless your soul, I'm not superannuated yet. I quite enjoy the idea. It will do me good, and my old bones won't suffer, for traveling nowadays is almost as easy as sitting in a chair." A restless movement from Laurie suggested that his chair was not easy, or that he did not like the plan, and made the old man add hastily, "I don't mean to be the marplot or a burden. I go because I think you'd feel happier than if I were left behind. I don't intend to gad about with you, but leave you free to go where you like, while I amuse myself in my own way. I've friends in London and Paris, and should like to visit them. Meantime, you can go to Italy, Germany, Switzerland, where you will, and enjoy pictures, music, scenery, and adventures to your heart's content." Now Laurie felt just then that his heart was entirely broken, and the world a howling wilderness, But at the sound of certain words which the old gentleman artfully introduced into his closing sentence, the broken heart gave an unexpected leap, and a green oasis or two suddenly appeared in the howling wilderness. He sighed, and then said in a spiritless tone, "Just as you like, sir. It doesn't matter where I go, or what I do." "It does to me. Remember that, my lad. I give you entire liberty, but I trust you to make an honest use of it. Promise me that, Laurie." "Anything you like, sir." "Good," thought the old gentleman. "You don't care now, but there'll come a time when that promise will keep you out of mischief, or I'm much mistaken." Being an energetic individual, Mr. Lawrence struck while the iron was hot, and before the blighted being recovered spirit enough to rebel, they were off. During the time necessary for preparation, Laurie bore himself as young gentlemen usually do in such cases. He was moody, irritable, and pensive by turns, lost his appetite, neglected his dress, and devoted much time to playing tempestuously on the piano, avoided Jo, but consoled himself by staring at her from his window, with a tragical face that haunted her dreams by night and oppressed her with a heavy sense of guilt by day. Unlike some sufferers, he never spoke of his unrequited passion, and would allow no one, not even Mrs. March, to attempt consolation or offer sympathy. On some accounts this was a relief to his friends, but the weeks before his departure were very uncomfortable, and everyone rejoiced that the poor dear fellow was going away to forget his trouble and come home happy. Of course he smiled darkly at their delusion, but passed it by with the sad superiority of one who knew that his fidelity, like his love, was unalterable. When the parting came, he affected high spirits to conceal certain inconvenient emotions which seemed inclined to assert themselves. This gaiety did not impose upon anybody, but they tried to look as if it did, for his sake, and he got on very well till Mrs. March kissed him with a whisper full of motherly solicitude. Then, feeling that he was going very fast, he hastily embraced them all round, not forgetting the afflicted Hannah, and ran downstairs as if for his life. Jo followed a minute after, to wave her hand to him if he looked around. He did look round, came back, put his arms about her as she stood on the steps above him, and looked up at her with a face that made his short appeal both eloquent and pathetic. "Oh, Jo, can't you?" "Teddy, dear, I wish I could." That was all, except a little pause. Then Laurie straightened himself up and said, "It's all right, never mind," and went away without another word. Ah, but it wasn't all right, and Jo did mind, for while the curly head lay on her arm a minute after her hard answer, she felt as if she had stabbed her dearest friend, and when he left her without a look behind him, she knew that the boy Laurie never would come again. Chapter 13. Beth's Secret. When Jo came home that spring, she had been struck with the change in Beth. No one spoke of it, or seemed aware of it, for it had come too gradually to startle those who saw her daily. But to eyes sharpened by absence it was very plain, and a heavy weight fell on Jo's heart as she saw her sister's face. It was no paler, and but little thinner than in the autumn, yet there was a strange transparent look about it, as if the mortal was being slowly refined away, and the immortal shining through the frail flesh with an indescribably pathetic beauty. Jo saw it and felt it, but said nothing at the time, and soon the first impression lost much of its power, for Beth seemed happy. No one appeared to doubt that she was better, and presently, in other cares, Jo for a time forgot her fear. But when Laurie was gone, and peace prevailed again, the vague anxiety returned and haunted her. She had confessed her sins and been forgiven, but when she showed her savings and proposed the mountain trip, Beth had thanked her heartily, but begged her not to go so far away from home. Another little visit to the seashore would suit her better, and as Grandma could not be prevailed upon to leave the babies, Jo took Beth down to the quiet place where she could live much in the open air and let the fresh sea breezes blow a little color into her pale cheeks. It was not a fashionable place, but even among the pleasant people there, the girls made few friends, preferring to live for one another. Beth was too shy to enjoy society, and Jo too wrapped in her to care for anyone else. So they were all in all to each other, and came and went quite unconscious of the interest they excited in those about them, who watched with sympathetic eyes the strong sister and the feeble one, always together, as if they felt instinctively that a long separation was not far away. They did feel it, yet neither spoke it, for often between ourselves and those nearest and dearest to us there exists a reserve which is very hard to overcome. Jo felt as if a veil had fallen between her heart and Beth's, but when she put out her hand to lift it up, there seemed something sacred in the silence, and she waited for Beth to speak. She wondered, and was thankful also, that her parents did not seem to see what she saw, and during the quiet weeks, when the shadow grew so plain to her, she said nothing of it to those at home, believing that it would tell itself when Beth came back no better. She wondered still more if her sister really guessed the hard truth, and what thoughts were passing through her mind during the long hours when she lay on the warm rocks with her head in Jo's lap, while the winds blew healthfully over her and the sea made music at her feet. One day Beth told her. Jo thought she was asleep. She lay so still, and putting down her book, sat looking at her with wistful eyes, trying to see signs of hope in the faint color of Beth's cheeks. But she could not find enough to satisfy her, for the cheeks were very thin, and the hands seemed too feeble to hold even the rosy little shells they had been gathering. It came to her then, more bitterly than ever, that Beth was slowly drifting away from her, and her arms instinctively tightened their hold upon the dearest treasure she possessed. For a moment her eyes were too dim for seeing, and when they cleared, Beth was looking up at her so tenderly that there was hardly any need for her to say, "Jo, dear, I'm glad you know it. I've tried to tell you, but I couldn't." There was no answer, except her sister's cheek against her own, not even tears, for when most deeply moved, Jo did not cry. She was the weaker then, and Beth tried to comfort and sustain her with her arms about her, and the soothing words she whispered in her ear. "I've known it for a good while, dear, and now I'm used to it. It isn't hard to think of, or to bear. Try to see it so, and don't be troubled about me, because it's best, indeed it is." "Is this what made you so unhappy in the autumn, Beth? You did not feel it then, and keep it to yourself so long, did you?" asked Jo, refusing to see or say that it was best, but glad to know that Laurie had no part in Beth's trouble. "Yes, I gave up hoping then, but I didn't like to own it. I tried to think it was a sick fancy, and would not let it trouble anyone. But when I saw you all so well and strong and full of happy plans, it was hard to feel that I could never be like you, and then I was miserable, Jo. Oh, Beth, and you didn't tell me, didn't let me comfort and help you? How could you shut me out and bear it all alone?" Jo's voice was full of tender reproach, and her heart ached to think of the solitary struggle that must have gone on while Beth learned to say goodbye to health, love, and life, and take up her cross so cheerfully. Perhaps it was wrong, but I tried to do right. I wasn't sure. No one said anything, and I hoped I was mistaken. It would have been selfish to frighten you all when Marmee was so anxious about Meg and Amy away, and you so happy with Laurie. At least I thought so then. And I thought that you loved him, Beth, and I went away because I couldn't," cried Jo, glad to say all the truth. Beth looked so amazed at the idea that Jo smiled in spite of her pain and added softly, "Then you didn't, dearie? I was afraid it was so, and imagined your poor little heart full of lovelornity all that while." "Why, Jo, how could I, when he was so fond of you?" asked Beth, as innocently as a child. "I do love him dearly. He is so good to me. How can I help it? But he never could be anything to me but a brother. I hope he truly will be sometime." "Not through me," said Jo decidedly. "Amy is left for him, and they would suit excellently, but I have no heart for such things now. I don't care what becomes of anybody but you, Beth. You must get well." I want to, oh, so much. I try, but every day I lose a little and feel more sure that I shall never gain it back. It's like the tide, Joe. When it turns, it goes slowly, but it can't be stopped. It shall be stopped. Your tide must not turn so soon. 19 is too young. Beth, I can't let you go. I'll work and pray and fight against it. I'll keep you in spite of everything. There must be ways. It can't be too late. God won't be so cruel as to take you from me, cried poor Joe rebelliously, for her spirit was far less piously submissive than Beth's. Simple, sincere people seldom speak much of their piety. It shows itself in acts rather than in words, and has more influence than homilies or protestations. Beth could not reason upon or explain the faith that gave her courage and patience to give up life and cheerfully wait for death. Like a confiding child, she asked no questions but left everything to God and nature, Father and Mother of us all, feeling sure that they, and they only, could teach and strengthen heart and spirit for this life and the life to come. She did not rebuke Joe with saintly speeches, only loved her better for her passionate affection, and clung more closely to the dear human love from which our Father never means us to be weaned, but through which he draws us closer to himself. She could not say, "I'm glad to go," for life was very sweet to her. She could only sob out, "I'll try to be willing," while she held fast to Joe as the first bitter wave of this great sorrow broke over them together. By and by, Beth said with recovered serenity, "You'll tell them this when we go home?" "I think they will see it without words," sighed Joe, for now it seemed to her that Beth changed every day. "Perhaps not. I've heard that the people who love best are often blindest to such things. If they don't see it, you will tell them for me. I don't want any secrets, and it's kinder to prepare them. Meg has John and the babies to comfort her, but you must stand by Father and Mother, won't you, Joe?" "If I can, but Beth, I don't give up yet. I'm going to believe that it is a sick fancy, and not let you think it's true," said Joe, trying to speak cheerfully. Beth lay a minute thinking, and then said in her quiet way, "I don't know how to express myself, and shouldn't try to any one but you, because I can't speak out except to my old Joe. I only mean to say that I have a feeling that it never was intended I should live long. I'm not like the rest of you. I never made any plans about what I'd do when I grow up. I never thought of being married as you all did. I couldn't seem to imagine myself anything but stupid little Beth, trotting about at home, of no use anywhere but there. I never wanted to go away, and the hard part now is the leaving you all. I'm not afraid, but it seems as if I should be homesick for you even in heaven." Joe could not speak, and for several minutes there was no sound but the sigh of the wind and the lapping of the tide. A white-winged gull flew by, with the flash of sunshine on its silvery breast. Beth watched it till it vanished, and her eyes were full of sadness. A little gray-coated sandbird came tripping over the beach, peeping softly to itself as if enjoying the sun and the sea. It came quite close to Beth, looked at her with a friendly eye, and sat upon a warm stone, dressing its wet feathers quite at home. Beth smiled and felt comforted, for the tiny thing seemed to offer its small friendship and remind her that a pleasant world was still to be enjoyed. "Dear little bird, see, Joe, how tame it is. I like Peeps better than the gulls. They are not so wild and handsome, but they seem happy, confiding little things. I used to call them my birds last summer, and Mother said they reminded her of me, busy, Quaker-colored creatures, always near the shore, and always chirping that contented little song of theirs. You are the gull, Joe, strong and wild, fond of the storm and the wind, flying far out to sea, and happy all alone. Meg is the turtle dove, and Amy is like the lark she writes about, trying to get up among the clouds, but always dropping down into its nest again. Dear little girl, she's so ambitious, but her heart is good and tender, and no matter how high she flies, she will never forget home. I hope I shall see her again, but she seems so far away." She is coming in the spring, and I mean that you shall be all ready to see her and enjoy her. I'm going to have you well and rosy by that time," began Joe, feeling that of all the changes in Beth, the talking change was the greatest, for it seemed to cost no effort now, and she thought aloud in a way quite unlike bashful Beth. "Joe, dear, don't hope any more. It won't do any good. I'm sure of that. We won't be miserable, but enjoy being together while we wait. We'll have happy times, for I don't suffer much, and I think the tide will go out easily if you help me." Joe leaned down to kiss the tranquil face, and with that silent kiss she dedicated herself, soul and body, to Beth. She was right. There was no need of any words when they got home, for father and mother saw plainly now what they had prayed to be saved from seeing. Tired with her short journey, Beth went at once to bed, saying how glad she was to be at home, and when Joe went down she found that she would be spared the hard task of telling Beth's secret. Her father stood leaning his head on the mantelpiece and did not turn as she came in, but her mother stretched out her arms as if for help, and Joe went to comfort her without a word. That is the end of chapter 13, and sorry to leave on a sad note, but chapter 14 is called New Impressions, and the first word is at, and so we will read that one next time, hopefully tomorrow. And I will bid you adieu, and I hope that God blesses you and that you have a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.